I've always been interested in time travel and the idea that it could ever actually happen, but I really just wanted to learn more about it, so I found this iceberg that goes pretty in-depth into time travel, what it is, and time anomalies, that kind of thing. So yeah, go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, follow my Instagram, join my Discord, let's hang out. I have a Patreon with exclusive videos, or if you join here on YouTube, you get to vote on what videos I make. But anyway, I want to learn about time travel, so let's go ahead. Starting in layer 1 with, first of all, time travel. Time travel refers to the idea of moving between different points in time, either into the future or the past. In science fiction, it's often portrayed as something people can do with machines, portals, or other technology. In real-world physics, time travel into the future is actually possible under certain circumstances. According to Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, time doesn't move at the same rate for everyone. For example, if someone were to travel close to the speed of light, time for them would pass more slowly compared to someone standing still. This is called time dilation, and it's been confirmed through experiments involving high-speed particles and astronauts spending time in orbit. Time travel into the past, however, is far more controversial and complicated. Most physicists believe that going backward in time would lead to logical problems, such as changing events that already happened. There are a few speculative models in physics that we'll get to later on, such as wormholes or closed time-like curves that suggest time loops could theoretically exist under extreme conditions, but none of them have ever been proved or observed, and many would require forms of energy or matter that we don't even know how to create or control. Stephen Hawking's time traveler party. In 2009, the physicist Stephen Hawking conducted a simple but clever experiment. He hosted a party that was intended only for time travelers, but he didn't send out the invitations until after the event had already taken place. The idea was that if time travel into the past were possible, then someone from the future might find out about the event and show up, but nobody came. Hawking said this was experimental evidence against the possibility of time travel into the past, though he presented it mostly as a joke. Still, the point he was making was serious. If time travel to the past were real and if it was freely accessible, we might expect to have already seen some signs of it, such as people from the future visiting our time. The fact that we haven't may suggest that either time travel is impossible, or that there are rules or limitations we don't understand, like not being able to go back further than the moment time travel was first invented. Or maybe it has happened and we just don't know. H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells was a British author who wrote one of the earliest and most influential science fiction stories about time travel, called The Time Machine. It was published in 1895, oh my god. In the book, a scientist builds a device that lets him move forward and backward through time, and he uses it to explore both the distant future and the eventual end of the Earth. What made Wells' story so important wasn't just the concept, but the way he treated time travel as a scientific idea rather than magic or fantasy. He helped popularize the idea of time as a fourth dimension, something you could theoretically move through just like space. Wells didn't invent the idea of moving through time, but he was one of the first to treat it with a scientific lens, which influenced both fiction and real-world scientific thinking. His work laid the foundation for the way time travel has been portrayed ever since, in books, films, and scientific discussions all alike. Grandfather paradox. The grandfather paradox is one of the best-known problems associated with time travel to the past. It describes a logical contradiction. Imagine a person travels back in time and kills their own grandfather before their parent was born. If that happened, the time traveler could never be born, meaning they couldn't have gone back in time in the first place. But if they didn't exist, then they couldn't have killed their own grandfather, which means their grandfather would live, and they would be born, so then their grandfather would die, and so on. It's a loop with no clear resolution. Now, I'm gonna go off script for a second, but this was introduced to me through Futurama, which I think is so funny in the episode where Fry travels back in time and becomes his own grandfather because he fucks his grandma. That's some good comedy. Anyway, this paradox is often used to argue that time travel to the past is either impossible or must be limited in some way, like preventing changes to events that have already happened. Some theories propose that the universe might protect itself from paradox paradoxes by making certain events impossible to change no matter what the time traveler does. Others suggest that if you did change the past, it would split the timeline and create an alternate universe, avoiding that contradiction entirely. But these ideas are purely theoretical and none have been proven. Butterfly effect. The butterfly effect is the idea that small actions can lead to large and unpredictable consequences over time. It comes from chaos theory, a branch of mathematics that studies complex systems. The name comes from the metaphor that a butterfly flapping its wings in one part of the world could eventually lead to a tornado in another part of the world, due to a chain of small changes building up. In time travel stories, the butterfly effect is used to show how even minor changes in the past can completely reshape the future. For example, if someone goes back in time and steps on a bug, that small action might cause a series of events that change history, maybe even preventing their own birth. This concept ties closely to the grandfather paradox, but it's less about contradictions and more about how sensitive systems are to small disturbances. It reflects the idea that the past is deeply connected to the present, and changing anything, even slightly, could make the future unrecognizable. Mandela effect. The Mandela effect is a phenomenon where large groups of people remember something differently than how it actually occurred. It's named after Nelson Mandela because some people, mostly online, claim to remember him dying in prison in the 1980s, even though he actually died in 2013. Other examples include people misremembering the spelling of Berenstain Bears, or thinking the Monopoly Man wears a monocle when he actually doesn't. Some people speculate that the Mandela effect is evidence of alternate timelines or parallel universes, suggesting that these false memories are actually real in a different version of reality. While there's no scientific proof for this, it ties into time travel discussions, especially around the idea that changing the past might cause reality to glitch or split into different versions. More realistically, the Mandela effect is usually explained by how human memory works. People often misremember details, especially when those details seem to fit better with what they expect or assume. Wormholes. Wormholes are theoretical structures in space-time that could connect two distant points, kind of like a tunnel through the fabric of the universe. The idea comes from Einstein's general theory of relativity. In theory, a wormhole could allow someone to travel vast distances very quickly, or even jump between different times. For a wormhole to exist and be stable enough for travel, it would require an exotic form of matter with negative energy, something that has been theorized but never observed. Some physicists have proposed that if one end of a wormhole moves at near light speed and then returns to its original position, the two ends might experience time differently due to time dilation. This could potentially allow for time travel between them, but this is purely theoretical and relies on extremely specific, unproven conditions. Even if wormholes are possible, they may collapse too quickly to be useful, or require technology far beyond anything that we currently have. TikTok time traveler. In early May 2024, Florida real estate agent Alex Schall posted surveillance footage from his Airbnb property on TikTok. The clip shows a young man entering a shed and then seemingly disappearing. The next day, an older man wearing similar glasses emerged instead. This led to speculation of a time traveler who aged rapidly overnight. Schall's interpretation sparked viral interest and debate. Some viewers proposed a hidden door, twins, or even supernatural explanations. Others took it seriously as potential time travel evidence. The local police investigated but found no one inside. Schall claimed significant personal stress and pulled his Airbnb listing amid online harassment. However, there is no corroborating proof. No internal cameras inside the shed, no matching footprints or forensics, no official confirmation. As with most caught-on-camera time travel claims, the most likely explanations lie in human error, staged footage, or misinterpretation. It's probably just an urban legend or like a viral hoax, so. Jacob von Hogflume. Jacob von Hogflume is often credited as the first known inventor of time travel. According to several commemorative plaques found in cities like London and Edinburgh, he was born in the year 2091 and died in 1909, suggesting he lived his life in reverse after a malfunction with his time machine stranded him in the past. These plaques describe his groundbreaking experiments in temporal mechanics and even imply that he may have played a quiet role in shaping historical events during his unintended stay in the early 20th century. The idea that someone born in the distant future could travel backward, live an entire life, and leave behind subtle traces of advanced knowledge is one of the more romanticized versions of time travel lore. The real twist, though, none of this is true. I just lied to you. The entire Jacob von Hogflume story was invented by British humorist Chris Dolan as part of a satirical art project poking fun at pseudo-history and our fascination with mysterious inventors. The plaques were installed, but as jokes, not tributes. It's one of those cases where the line between parody and urban legend gets blurred, especially online. Like, I'm sure there's people out there who actually believe this guy is real. Nostradamus. Michel de Nostradame, better known as Nostradamus, was a 16th century French astrologer and writer who became famous for his book Les Prophéties, a collection of cryptic four-line poems known as quatrains. These quatrains were said to predict future events, and over the centuries, people have interpreted them as forecasting everything from Napoleon to Hitler to 9/11. Nostradamus is often included in time travel discussions, not because he traveled through time himself, but because many believe he had access to knowledge of the future. His writings are vague and symbolic, often referencing celestial movements, natural disasters, or royal figures in abstract terms. What makes his work relevant to time travel discourse is the way people retroactively apply his predictions to real-world events. Rather than providing verifiable forecasts, his texts tend to be so open-ended that they can be made to fit countless scenarios in hindsight. There is no scientific or historical evidence that Nostradamus had precognitive abilities, nor that he received knowledge from the future. His work is better understood as a product of Renaissance astrology and literary mysticism rather than anything resembling real foresight. But he still holds a place in popular imagination as a symbol of prophecy and temporal awareness. Time slips. Time slips are a type of anecdotal phenomenon in which a person reports suddenly experiencing a different time period, either from the past or occasionally the future. These events are typically described as spontaneous and brief, and the person often feels physically present in the alternate time. In some accounts, people claim to have walked through a doorway or down a street and found themselves in an older version of the same location, complete with historical clothing, architecture, and sounds. These details often vanish when the person turns around or attempts to interact. There is no scientific evidence to support that time slips are real occurrences. Most explanations focus on psychological or neurological factors such as dissociation, false memory, or temporal lobe activity. In some cases, environmental conditions like low light, stress, or electromagnetic fields might contribute to altered perception. These paranormal theories suggest that time might be layered or non-linear, and that under specific unknown conditions, these layers could briefly intersect. Still, no time slip has ever been verified under controlled circumstances, and many of the most popular stories lack any physical evidence. Time dilation. Time dilation is often brought up in serious conversations about time travel because it's one of the only effects confirmed by modern physics that actually alters how time flows. But what makes it more than just a theoretical idea is how precisely it's been measured in real-world situations. While the basics were already touched on earlier, what's worth digging into is how it scales and why it matters. At extreme velocities, like speeds approaching the speed of light, the effect doesn't just slow time by seconds, but by years or even centuries, depending on how long and how fast you're traveling. This isn't something humans have experienced personally yet, but it's absolutely visible in subatomic particles and GPS satellites. In particle accelerators, unstable particles that normally decay in microseconds live much longer when they're shot through at high speed. That's not a trick of measurement, it's their actual lifespan stretching due to time dilation. Like, the actual time is slowing. It's crazy. Likewise, satellites orbiting Earth have to constantly adjust their onboard clocks to stay in sync with ground-based systems because time is literally moving differently at that altitude and speed. If we ever reach a point where space travel pushes toward relativistic speeds, time dilation could be the key to one-way time travel into the future. Someone aboard a fast-moving ship could return to Earth having aged only a few months, while decades passed here. It doesn't open the door to backward time travel or paradoxes, but it proves that time is not a constant. It bends and stretches based on motion and gravity. In that sense, we're not really waiting for time travel to be invented, it's already happening. We just haven't really built the machines to make it meaningful at human scales yet. And that was layer 1, guys. Let's get into layer 2. I am very excited. This iceberg is fucking awesome. We're gonna start off the next layer with 1941 bridge opening. This case centers around a photograph taken during the 1941 reopening of the South Fork Bridge in British Columbia. What made it go viral decades later was the appearance of a man who seemed out of place. He wore dark sunglasses, had a graphic printed t-shirt, and held a small camera that looked almost digital. To modern eyes, he looked like someone from the 2000s photoshopped into a black and white crowd. For a time, the internet ran wild with claims that this man was a time traveler caught on camera. But when historians looked closely, they found that every item he was wearing could be traced back to that era. The glasses resembled protective goggles from the 1930s, the camera looked like a Kodak folding model available at the time, and the sweater, though printed, wasn't unheard of in athletic wear back then. The photo wasn't faked and the man wasn't from the future, he just stood out because he didn't conform to most people's stereotypical idea of 1940s fashion. World War II cell phone. A black and white film taken in the 1940s at a wartime factory gained online attention when someone noticed a woman in the background who appeared to be holding a cell phone to her ear. Or it could be a man, I can't really tell. But they're holding something small and rectangular and seems to be speaking into it. That image alone led some people to speculate that she might be a time traveler using a modern device. But when the clip was analyzed more carefully, it became clear that the object was likely just an early hearing aid or communication device being tested by the company in the film, which was DuPont, which at the time was experimenting with mobile electronics. There were even internal company records showing similar devices being developed, so it's not really that cool. Bold Street time slips. In Liverpool, England, there's a street called Bold Street that has become legendary for what people claim are real-life time slips. The stories almost always follow a similar pattern. Someone's walking along, usually near a specific area with older buildings, and suddenly everything around them changes. Cars vanish, the street becomes quieter, shop signs shift into older styles, and people are dressed in clothing from decades or sometimes centuries ago. The most famous account comes from a police officer who reportedly stepped into a version of Bold Street from the 1950s, only to return seconds later to the modern world. These experiences are often extremely vivid, with some people even trying to make purchases at old-time shops that no longer exist. Skeptics suggest these are hallucinations, memory glitches, or even mini fugue states triggered by stress or environmental factors. But believers argue that something real is happening. Tomb of London. In Brompton Cemetery, London, there's a real 19th century mausoleum known as the Hannah Courtoy Tomb. Built in 1854, it's one of the largest and most mysterious structures in the cemetery, designed in an Egyptian revival style with obscure symbols, heavy stone doors, and sealed entrances. What makes it stand out isn't just its unusual design, but the fact that it's remained locked for decades with no surviving key, and little is known about its exact construction or internal layout. This has fueled a number of speculative theories and urban legends. Some claim the tomb was designed by Samuel Warner, an inventor involved in spiritualist circles, and that it may contain secret chambers or even advanced devices. The most persistent rumor is that it houses a Victorian time machine, based purely on its design and the fact that no one has entered it in living memory. In 1998, a Reuters article repeated these speculations, helping spread the idea internationally. World War III prediction. In the early 2000s, a user calling himself John Titor began posting on online message boards claiming to be a time traveler from the year 2036. He said he was a soldier sent back to retrieve an old IBM 5100 computer, which he claimed was necessary in the future to debug legacy systems. Along with technical details about this machine, he also made predictions about an upcoming civil war in the US, a devastating World War III that would take place in 2015, and a radically altered world political structure. Some of his predictions were vague, while others were very specific, but none of them came true. The Titor saga eventually unraveled under scrutiny, and several researchers pointed out inconsistencies and traced his IP data to a known hoaxer. So, sorry. Bootstrap paradox. This is one of the most mind-bending thought experiments in time travel theory. Imagine someone goes back in time and gives Shakespeare a copy of Hamlet. Shakespeare publishes it, and centuries later, someone finds that book and sends it back in time again. And then it just loops over and over again. So in that loop, who actually wrote Hamlet? The idea is that the information or object never had an origin. It just exists in this endless loop. This kind of paradox is called a bootstrap because the object pulls itself into existence without a clear beginning. It raises serious questions about causality, authorship, and whether information can exist independently of a creator. It's often used in fiction, but some physicists have proposed that under certain closed timeline curve models, these loops might be logically self-consistent, meaning that they could technically happen without necessarily breaking the laws of physics, even though they do defy how we understand time and cause and effect. The twin paradox. The twin paradox is a real-world thought experiment based on Einstein's theory of relativity. It goes like this. You have two twins. One of them stays on Earth, and the other travels into space at near light speed. When the traveling twin comes back, they're physically younger than the twin who stayed. And the paradox here is that it feels like each twin should see the other one aging more slowly because all motion is relative. But the resolution lies in the fact that the traveling twin experiences acceleration and deceleration, changes in motion that break the symmetry. This has actually been tested on a small scale using highly precise atomic clocks, which confirm that time passed more slowly for moving objects, just like the theory predicts. Bob White, Tim Jones. Between 2001 and 2003, people around the internet began receiving bizarre emails from someone claiming to be a time traveler stranded in the year 2003. Using the names Bob White and Tim Jones, he begged for help building a dimensional warp generator, listing parts like quantum flux emitters and gravity capacitors. The emails were strange, frantic, and poorly written, but so consistent in tone and detail that eventually journalists traced the source to Robert J. Todino, a man with a long history of sending spam and had reportedly struggled with mental illness. While the emails are sometimes lumped in with fictional stories like John Titor, this case stood out because it was real. A person earnestly, or at least persistently, claimed to be displaced in time. Like maybe this guy actually thought he was. Tarid? The legend of the man from Tarid begins in 1954 at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. Customs officials stopped a man with a passport from a country that didn't exist. The man insisted that Tarid was a real nation located between France and Spain with a 1,000-year history and became angry when no one recognized it. His passport stamps and documents all looked authentic. He was held overnight in a guarded hotel room, but by morning he had vanished without a trace, along with his documents. This story circulated for years and was later traced to a real event involving a man named John Allen Zegrus, who was arrested in Japan in 1960 for using a fake passport and lying about his background. Over time, the tale was just distorted into this Tarid myth, blending real elements with pure fiction. Neutron star theory. Neutron stars are the incredibly dense remnants of massive stars that have gone supernova. Just a teaspoon of their matter would weigh billions of tons. Because of their extreme mass and rotation, some physicists have proposed that neutron stars might create gravitational conditions intense enough to warp space-time, potentially forming closed time-like curves, which are mathematical structures that allow for time loops. These ideas stem from general relativity, which allows for such phenomena in theory, but in practice, neutron stars are incredibly unstable and hostile environments. There's no evidence yet that they actually produce time loops or anything resembling time travel, but who knows? Chaplin's time traveler. In 2010, a filmmaker named George Clark discovered something strange in behind-the-scenes footage from Charlie Chaplin's 1928 film The Circus. In a promotional clip, a woman walks past the camera holding something up to her ear and speaking. To modern viewers, it looks exactly like someone talking on a cell phone. The clip exploded online with headlines claiming it showed proof of time travel, but historians and archivists quickly pointed out that the object was almost certainly an early hearing aid. In the 1920s, hearing devices were boxy and often handheld, and people would naturally speak into them to test the sound. The video wasn't doctored and the footage was authentic, but that mystery object wasn't futuristic. It only seemed that way because of how modern our assumptions have become about how people behave when holding something to their ear. Hitler's murder paradox. This is one of the most classic time travel paradoxes. If you went back in time and killed Adolf Hitler before he rose to power, you'd prevent the Holocaust, World War II, and countless developments that followed. But without those events, your reason for inventing time travel, or for taking the trip in the first place, might never exist. So if you never go back, Hitler lives and the cycle resets. This is a specific variation of the grandfather paradox. But this one brings up deeper philosophical questions. If you could stop a monster from rising, would the world be better, or would someone worse take their place? And even if it worked, would you have the right to fundamentally rewrite history with all its moral and cultural consequences? These kinds of questions are what keep time travel fiction so popular. It forces us to confront the limits of morality, causality, and personal responsibility in extreme circumstances. Exotic matter. Exotic matter refers to hypothetical substances that have negative mass or negative energy density, something that doesn't exist in any practical form but is mathematically consistent with certain solutions in general relativity. In theory, exotic matter could open a transversible wormhole or power a warp drive by bending spacetime itself. Without it, constructs like wormholes would collapse instantly under their own gravity. Some quantum field theories suggest that exotic matter might be produced in tiny amounts through quantum fluctuations, like in the Casimir effect. But even if that's true, we're talking about energy so small they're nowhere near usable. Exotic matter is considered essential for making time travel physically possible, but as of now, it's just a theoretical placeholder. Something that needs to exist for the math to work, but which we haven't found, created, or controlled in any meaningful way. Alright, that was layer 2, guys. Let's get into layer 3, where it gets a little bit more interesting. And we're going to start with Montauk Project. The Montauk Project is a long-running conspiracy theory claiming that the US government conducted secret experiments on time travel, psychological warfare, and interdimensional portals at Camp Hero in Montauk, New York. Most of the story comes from Preston Nichols, who co-authored a series of books starting in 1992. He alleged that children were abducted for experiments, that psychic portals were opened, and that a monster was even manifested through thought. While the claims are elaborate and detailed, no documentation has ever been produced to confirm it. The base itself was decommissioned and opened as a state park, and no evidence of underground labs or time technology has been found. The Montauk myth grew pretty much likely out of Cold War anxiety, urban legend culture, and media influence, and it served as a partial inspiration for Stranger Things. It's not backed by any official records or credible investigations, and nearly all evidence comes from unverifiable personal accounts. Mike Tyson iPhone photo. This case comes from a 1995 boxing match where Mike Tyson fought Peter McNeely. In some footage, a man in the crowd appears to be holding up what looks like a smartphone, causing speculation that it could be a time traveler caught on tape. At first glance, the object looks like a modern device, a silver rectangle held vertically. But tech historians quickly pointed out that early digital cameras and camcorders with that exact shape were already available in the early 90s. One specific example is the Casio QV10, which looks almost identical and was released in 1995. Additionally, even some early point-and-shoots had LCD screens. The footage isn't doctored and the person isn't using an iPhone, it just looks modern looking. Novikov self-consistency principle. The Novikov self-consistency principle is one of the most important ideas in theoretical physics when it comes to making time travel mathematically possible without causing paradoxes. It was introduced in the 1980s by Russian physicist Igor Dmitriev Novikov, who was working on ways to reconcile Einstein's general relativity with the logical problems that time travel creates. At its core, the Novikov principle says this: if time travel is ever possible, then the timeline must be self-consistent no matter what. That means you could go back in time, but you couldn't actually change anything in a way that creates contradiction. Events would either play out exactly as they already did, or your attempts to alter them would always be somehow prevented. And I want to point out really quickly as well that this isn't saying that the universe outwardly or actively actually stops you. It's just saying that in the timeline, if you were to go back and do anything, it would have already happened. So you can't change anything because the timeline is set. It's kind of like how they did it in Harry Potter, they went back in time and then they fucking threw the rocks or whatever, but that had already happened, Anyway, to understand why this matters, you have to look at the grandfather paradox. So, Novikov's principle does not dodge the paradox, it neutralizes it by stating that any such contradiction is simply forbidden by the laws of physics. Under this framework, if you traveled back in time and tried to shoot your grandfather, the gun would jam or someone else would intervene or you'd change your mind. Whatever the scenario is, the outcome would always remain consistent with the future that you came from. This idea takes a deterministic view of the timeline. Everything that happens, has happened, and will happen is part of one consistent sequence of events. You can interact with the past, but you can't change it in a way that breaks causality. And this isn't just philosophical. There are actual mathematical models that support this idea in the context of general relativity. One such model involves closed time-like curves, or CTCs, which are solutions to Einstein's equations that allow for paths in space-time which loop back on themselves. These theoretical paths are what would allow time travel into the past. Novikov applied his principle directly to these CTCs, arguing that if such loops exist, then any object traveling along them must obey self-consistent behavior. There's no room for paradox because paradoxical situations are fundamentally impossible in those systems. One of the most cited thought experiments to demonstrate the Novikov principle is the billiard ball problem. Imagine a ball entering a wormhole and emerging in the past. As it exits, it collides with its earlier self in a way that causes the earlier ball to enter the wormhole exactly as it did in the first place. The loop is perfectly consistent. Now try to imagine the ball hitting its past self in a way that prevents it from entering the wormhole at all. That scenario just could not even happen under Novikov's rules because it would result in a contradiction. Only outcomes that reinforce the same idea are allowed. So what does that mean for time travel? Under Novikov's model, you can go back in time, but you can't change the past. If time travel ever becomes physically possible, it would function like a closed narrative. Anything you do in the past must already be a part of the timeline that led to your departure. This doesn't mean your actions are meaningless, it just means that they're already accounted for. You might become the very cause of events you thought you were trying to change, creating a loop where your presence in the past was always part of history. I hope that makes sense. Next, we have Håkan Nordqvist. In 2006, Swedish man Håkan Nordqvist appeared in a TV documentary claiming he had accidentally traveled to the year 2042. He said he was fixing a leak under his sink when he found himself in a futuristic version of his home where he met an older man who claimed to be his future self. He even showed video footage of himself interacting with this man, saying that they had matching tattoos. The clip went viral and was treated by some as real evidence, but the story was later revealed to be part of a marketing campaign by a Swedish insurance company called AMF to promote pension awareness. The footage and testimony were staged. Nordqvist has never offered additional proof and no independent verification of the footage exists. So yeah, it was just a nothing burger. Retrocausality. Retrocausality is a serious concept in quantum physics that explores the idea of cause and effect flowing backward in time. In classic physics, cause always precedes effect. But in quantum mechanics, there are interpretations where future measurements can influence the behavior of particles in the past. This is particularly relevant in delayed choice experiments, where the way an experiment is set up seems to retroactively determine how a particle behaved before the setup was finalized. Retrocausality is not universally accepted. It's one of several competing interpretations of quantum behavior. There's no evidence that retrocausality can be used to send information information back in time or enable time travel, but it raises deep questions about whether the arrow of time is as rigid as we assume. It's really fucking interesting. I could do a whole video just on retrocausality. The expected one. This story comes from a 2008 report out of China where archaeologists excavating a 400-year-old sealed Ming Dynasty tomb allegedly discovered a miniature gold ring in the shape of a modern wristwatch engraved with the word Swiss. The claim was that the tomb had been sealed since the 17th century, making the presence of a Swiss-style watch impossible. The story ran in some media outlets but never included follow-up photos or publication in any actual archaeological journals or statements from confirmed archaeologists. Most experts now believe that it was either a fabrication or a modern object accidentally introduced during the dig. So yeah, whatever, dude. Penrose time cycles. This is a real cosmological model proposed by Nobel Prize-winning physicist Sir Roger Penrose. In conformal cyclic cosmology, or CCC, the universe doesn't begin and end with one big bang and big crunch. It undergoes infinite cycles, or aeons. Each aeon ends in infinite expansion, and the next begins with a new big bang. Penrose claims that traces of the previous aeon's collapse could be visible in the cosmic microwave background as concentric circles of radiation. He published this with the Vahe Gurzadyan in 2010, but follow-up analyses by other physicists found that the statistical evidence was pretty weak or non-existent, so it's not been fully proved or disproven. Rudolph Fentz. This is one of the oldest and most circulated time travel legends. The story goes that in the 1950s, police in New York discovered a confused man wearing 19th century clothing, who was struck by a car and killed. When they checked his ID, everything matched a man who had disappeared in 1876. And the twist is that he had never aged. This tale is often cited in books and websites as proof of spontaneous time travel. In reality, the story was first published as fiction in a 1951 issue of Collier's magazine, written by science fiction author Jack Finney, who's best known for Body Snatchers. And over time, the story was stripped of its author credit and retold as a real event. But no death records, police files, or historical documentation has ever confirmed it, so it's not real. Alright, that was layer 3, guys. Wait, that's 3, right? Let me count. Yeah, that was 3. Let's get into layer 4, guys. I'm fucking hyped. We're gonna start this layer with the Philadelphia experiment. The Philadelphia experiment is a conspiracy theory about a secret US Navy test in 1943. The story goes that scientists tried to make a warship, the USS Eldridge, invisible to radar, but ended up teleporting it from Philadelphia to Norfolk, Virginia. Supposedly, the ship disappeared in a flash of green light, reappeared miles away, and then came back. Only now, some crew members were stuck inside the metal of the ship or went insane. The story came from letters sent in the 1950s by a man named Carl Allen to a UFO researcher named Morris Jessup, and it quickly became a staple in paranormal and government experiment circles. But none of it holds up. The Navy completely denies it ever happened, and the ship's logs show the Eldridge wasn't even in Philadelphia on the day of the alleged experiment. Turns out Carl Allen had a pretty bad reputation for inventing stories and making up stuff. He was known to send strange letters and confuse people just for fun. There's no physical evidence, no credible witnesses, and nothing official that supports the idea. Still, the story stuck, mainly because it plays into the people's fear of government secrets and science gone wrong. The Moberly Jourdain incident. In 1901, two British women, Charlotte Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, visited the gardens at Versailles, France. Later, they claimed they had a strange experience while walking near the Petit Trianon. According to them, the whole atmosphere suddenly changed, everything went quiet, and they started seeing people in old-fashioned clothes who seemed to be unaware of them. One of the women thought she saw Marie Antoinette drawing in a sketchbook. They believed they had somehow stepped into the 1700s like a time slip. They later even published a book called An Adventure using fake names. The book gained attention, but there's never been any real proof that it happened the way they said. Most experts today think it was probably a mix of imagination, suggestion, and maybe confusing reenactors or costumes for something paranormal. And there were no photos photos or records or witnesses, and their descriptions also changed over time, which made things even harder to believe. Iranian time machine. In 2013, an Iranian man named Ali Razaki made international headlines by claiming he had invented a time machine. He said it wasn't a machine you could ride, but a device that could predict someone's future up to 5 to 8 years in advance. According to him, it used algorithms to scan your life and tell you what was going to happen. He even said he'd registered it with the Iranian government as a legitimate invention. For a brief moment, people online wondered if Iran had secretly developed futuristic tech, but the whole story fell apart fast. Iranian news agencies later walked back the report, and government officials denied having anything to do with the device. So, a lot of these are so annoying, bro, because it's like just fake shit, you know? But the next entry is not anything fake, okay? Well, I mean, it's kind of fake, but you'll see. San Dimas time. San Dimas time isn't based on a real scientific idea. It's actually a storytelling concept that comes from the 1989 movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. In the film, the characters use a time-traveling phone booth, but the events in the past and future are still tied to real-time San Dimas, California, where they live. For example, if they spend an hour in the past, an hour also passes in the present. So even though they're jumping through time, the clock in their hometown keeps moving forward. The movie plays this for laughs, but the idea stuck and it got reused in other shows and games. Outside of fiction, though, San Dimas time isn't a real thing. It's not based on physics or anything observed in nature, it's just a plot device, a way to keep time travel from feeling too open-ended or confusing in a story. It helps create urgency, like you only have 10 minutes left, even when characters are moving through centuries. Alcubierre Warp Drive. The Alcubierre Drive is a real physics concept that was proposed in 1994 by Mexican physicist Miguel Alcubierre. He came up with a way, based on Einstein's theory of general relativity, to potentially move a spaceship faster than the speed of light, without technically breaking the rules of physics. This is really interesting. The idea is to compress space in front of the ship and expand it behind it, creating a warp bubble that moves through space-time. Inside the bubble, the ship doesn't move at all. Space itself moves around it. This lets you travel massive distances without ever locally going faster than light. But it's still entirely theoretical. For the drive to work, you'd need something called exotic matter with negative energy density, something we've never been able to produce or harness. Early calculations said it would take more energy than the entire mass of Jupiter just to move a small ship. Later tweaks brought the numbers down, but the energy needs are still completely beyond anything we can build. On top of that, there are huge problems we don't know how to solve, like how to keep the warp bubble stable or how to stop it once it starts. This is like what they do in Futurama, right? I just thought about this, like the fucking ship has that, right? Like it moves space around it. And isn't that show like, that show's fucking awesome, bro, because isn't like the writers have like 50 years combined of fucking like Harvard intelligence or whatever? Like that show is like pretty fucking smart, dude. I love that show. Anyway, Tipler cylinder. The Tipler cylinder is another time travel idea that comes straight from theoretical physics. It was proposed in 1974 by physicist Frank J. Tipler. He imagined a super long, super dense cylinder spinning really fast, so fast that it would drag space-time around with it. If the cylinder was infinitely long and spinning near the speed of light, it could theoretically allow objects near it to enter a closed time-like curve. That means you could loop around it and end up in your own past, at least according to the math behind general relativity. The catch is that it's completely impossible to build. An infinite cylinder doesn't exist, and even a really long one would collapse under its own gravity unless you used exotic matter, which, again, we've never found or made. Also, the faster it spins, the more unstable it becomes. Most physicists agree the Tipler cylinder is a thought experiment, not something we could ever build or test. It's useful for understanding what general relativity allows, but there's no evidence anything like this exists in the universe. It's a mathematical what if. Roberto Ferreira Nobrega. Roberto Nobrega is a Brazilian man who gained attention online in the 2010s by claiming to be a time traveler from the year 2075. His posts, mostly on Facebook and in viral videos, included vague predictions about future wars, technology, and disasters. He also claimed he visited the year 1910 and needed a 623 GB machine to get home. Some versions of his story say he was arrested and questioned, but there's no official record of this happening. His name mostly shows up in conspiracy forums and and YouTube compilations. I'm not gonna spend too much time on this one, I don't really care. The Green Children of Woolpit. The Green Children are a real medieval story from 12th century England. According to two chroniclers, William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall, two children with green skin appeared near the village of Woolpit in Suffolk. They didn't speak English and they wore unfamiliar clothing. Locals said they seemed disoriented and would only eat beans. Eventually, they learned English and the girl, the boy died young, explained that they came from a place called St. Martin's Land, where the sun never shone apparently and it was always twilight. Over time, her skin lost its green tint and she lived out her life in England. The story was written down decades after it supposedly happened, and historians today mostly treat it as folklore. One theory is that the kids were Flemish refugees displaced by war, and their odd appearance came from malnutrition, possibly chlorosis, which can cause a greenish skin tone. Others think it was just a symbolic tale like an allegory or a moral story about strangers and adaptation, just like the Bible or other kinds of mythologies. The Man from Lixaria. The Man from Lixaria is a lesser-known urban legend that appears in time travel compilations and fringe websites. The story claims that a man arrived at a European border in the mid-20th century with a passport from a country that doesn't exist, Lixaria. I mean, this is just the Man from Torrid again. I'm not gonna fucking spend time on this. You guys can Google it if you want, but whatever, dude. I like the science stuff more. And this is my fucking video, okay? Damn it, this is my fucking video, guys. Sorry. You can make your own video if you want, but it won't be as good as mine. Let's be real, guys. Anyway, okay. Next layer, starting now. Layer 5. Starting with Mike Markham. Mike Markham was an amateur inventor from Missouri who gained brief viral fame in the mid-1990s for claiming to build a time machine in his garage. He allegedly started experimenting with high-voltage Tesla coils and a modified CD laser, hoping to create a type of teleportation or time travel effect. In one interview on the late-night paranormal radio show Coast to Coast AM, he said he once threw a screw through the electromagnetic field and watched it vanish. From there, his experiments grew larger and more dangerous, with rumors that he was attempting to build a full-scale Jacob's Ladder-style device to send himself through time. Eventually, Markham disappeared from public view. Online, stories began spreading that he had actually succeeded, that he teleported and reappeared years later, cold and disoriented in a field in another state. But there's no evidence that this ever happened. Most sources agree that these later stories were just an internet legend. While Markham did appear on radio and had a short burst of attention, there's no proof he ever actually built anything capable of bending time. Safety Not Guaranteed. Safety Not Guaranteed is a 2012 indie film, but it was inspired by a real classified ad published in the September-October 1997 issue of Backwoods Home Magazine. The ad read, "Wanted, someone to go back in time with me. This is not a joke, you'll get paid after we get back. Must bring your own weapons. Safety not guaranteed, I've only done this once before." The ad was written as a joke by the magazine's editor, but it quickly went viral, getting shared online and sparking interest in the mystery of who wrote it and whether it could be real. The film takes that ad and builds a fictional story around it, focusing on a lonely man who truly believes he can time travel and the skeptical reporter who investigates him. While the movie is a character-driven story with no actual proof of time travel, it was cool, I guess. Okay, here's the more science shit. Missner Space. Missner Space is a mathematical model created to explore what happens when space-time is arranged in a way that allows time loops to form without relying on exotic matter or artificial constructs like wormholes. It's one of the simplest examples of a universe where causality breaks down naturally just from the way space and time are stitched together. In this model, the geometry of space-time itself creates a situation where if you move in a straight line long enough, you eventually return to your starting point in both space and time. The interesting part is that Missner Space is completely flat. There's no gravity involved. The weirdness doesn't come from mass or curvature, it comes from the way the coordinates are connected. That makes it a useful tool for theoretical physics, especially when testing whether time loops necessarily create paradoxes or whether certain configurations can stay self-consistent. But Missner Space also contains something called a Cauchy horizon, which marks a boundary beyond which you can't predict what happens. This makes makes it unstable and unrealistic as a model for our universe, but it still shows that time loops can exist in theory without needing any special materials or engines. Chronosynclastic infidibulum. This one's straight from the mind of Kurt Vonnegut. The term chronosynclastic infidibulum was invented for his 1959 novel, The Sirens of Titan. In that book, it's a weird region of space where all the different truths in the universe can exist at once, and anyone who enters it gets stretched across space and time. Vonnegut describes it in a way that's part sci-fi, part satire, and part philosophical joke. People who pass through one of these zones don't disappear, they just become scattered across multiple timelines, constantly existing in different places and moments all at once. None of this is based on real science. It's not a misunderstood theory or a misreported experiment. It's pure fiction made up for a story that plays with the idea of free will and fate. But because Vonnegut gave it such a weird official sounding name, the concept keeps getting brought up in time travel discussions online. If you see it mentioned in a serious context, just know, there is no chronosynclastic infidibulum outside of literature. Air Marshal Sir Victor Goddard. Victor Goddard was a decorated British Royal Air Force officer who reported one of the most famous time slip stories on record. In 1935, while flying over an abandoned airfield in Drim, Scotland, he claimed the area suddenly changed. Instead of seeing a decaying, unused space, he saw shiny yellow planes, mechanics in unfamiliar blue uniforms, and an active, fully functioning base. Everything looked bright and modern. He was confused, but he kept flying. 4 years later, when World War II started, the Drim airfield was reopened, and just like in his vision, it had yellow painted planes and blue coveralls. Goddard didn't tell the story publicly until years later, but he stood by it and included it in his memoirs. The account is still taken seriously mainly because of who he was, an experienced, respected pilot with no reason to lie. Still, there's no physical evidence that ever happened, and skeptics have pointed out that memory distortion, deja vu, or later reconstruction of the event could have played a role. But unlike a lot of time travel stories that rely on anonymous sources or online posts, this one came from a real person with a military background and a published record of what he claimed to see. Oh, maybe it was real, guys. Okay guys, now I'm really excited because we're getting into the really fucking cool one. So, ending reality. Ending reality is a theoretical concept sometimes brought up in speculative physics and science fiction circles. The basic idea is that if too many paradoxes occur, especially ones including time travel, causality, or closed time-like curves, it could cause a breakdown in the structure of space-time itself. Imagine you're running a program with too many errors, and eventually the whole thing would crash, right? Applied to the universe, this would mean that too many contradictions could overwhelm the consistency of reality, leading to total collapse. It's important to note, this isn't a mainstream scientific theory. It's more of a philosophical or narrative thought experiment that asks, what happens when cause and effect stop lining up? Some physicists have speculated that the universe might have built-in protections, such as that Novikov one we talked about earlier. But if they did occur, say killing your grandfather before you're born or creating a loop where something exists without origin, it could theoretically destabilize the entire chain of causality. In this concept, reality wouldn't just be altered, it would cease to function. Time would somehow unravel, matter could disintegrate, and the laws of physics might stop applying altogether. Everything would stop making sense because the universe would no longer be internally consistent. That's why ending reality is sometimes used as the ultimate consequence of unchecked paradoxes in time travel fiction. Quantum immortality. Quantum immortality is a fringe concept that comes from combining the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics with consciousness. The idea is this: if every possible outcome of a quantum event splits into a separate universe, then in any life or death situation, there will always be a branch where you survive. And from your own point of view, your consciousness continues to exist only in those timelines where you never die. No matter what happens, you always experience survival, even if everyone else in one universe sees you perish. The thought experiment often uses the quantum sewer slide setup. Imagine a gun that fires only when a quantum event triggers it. Every time it clicks, reality splits. In one branch you die, in another you don't. According to quantum immortality, you only ever stay conscious in the versions where you're still alive. It's a disturbing concept concept because it implies that your personal awareness could continue forever, even as your body decays or your surroundings become increasingly hostile. But there are serious issues with this theory. For one, human death isn't usually instant. It's a slow biological process, not a clean quantum event. Second, there's no scientific evidence that consciousness jumps between timelines. And most importantly, just because a universe exists where you survive doesn't mean your experience will be pleasant. You could be trapped in increasingly painful or degraded states just because your consciousness refuses to blink out. Caspar Hauser. Caspar Hauser was a real person who appeared suddenly in Nuremberg, Germany in 1828. He was a teenage boy, disoriented, barely able to speak, and holding a letter addressed to a local cavalry officer. The letter claimed he had been raised in isolation his whole life and now wished to join the army. When questioned, Caspar told a bizarre story, that he had spent his entire life in a dark cell with no contact except for a mysterious caretaker who occasionally brought him food and taught him to write his name. Within months, Hauser became a sensation. Some thought that he was an abused child, and others believed he was the lost heir to a royal house, possibly the Prince of Baden. He was taken in by noble families, taught to read and write, and began making public appearances. But the more people scrutinized him, the more holes appeared in his story. He would sometimes change details, fabricate injuries, and behave erratically. Eventually, public support turned into suspicion. In 1833, Hauser died from a stab wound he claimed was inflicted by a stranger. However, most historians now believe he stabbed himself and lied about it, either for attention or due to mental illness. Decades later, DNA testing cast doubt on any royal connection. What remains is a historical mystery, a young man with a traumatic past and possible delusions who became a mirror for people's fantasies about identity, nobility, and lost children. The Nodelston Messages. The Nodelston Messages are one of the most famous alleged cases of time communication through electronic means. In 1984, Ken Webster, a schoolteacher in the village of Dodelston, England, he claimed that his BBC microcomputer began displaying messages from a man living in the 16th century. The messages were written in strange, semi-archaic English and came from someone calling himself Lucas, who he said once lived in the same house as Webster 400 years earlier. The communications continued for months. Lucas described historical details from the Tudor period, asked Webster about modern life, and occasionally sent philosophical or cryptic messages. At one point, a third entity named 2109 allegedly began communicating too, claiming to be from the future and watching the experiment. Webster documented the experience in his 1985 book, The Vertical Plane, and it became a cult classic in paranormal literature, but dude, I don't fucking care about this shit. This is like so obviously fake. Andromeda Paradox. The Andromeda Paradox is a real thought experiment in physics proposed by mathematician Roger Penrose to show how relativity affects how we experience now across vast distances. Here's the basic idea. Imagine two people walking past each other on Earth. One is moving slightly toward the Andromeda galaxy and the other slightly away. Because of how special relativity works, they won't agree on what's happening in Andromeda on that exact moment. To one of them, an alien invasion might be already underway, and to the other, the decision to invade hasn't even been made yet. That might sound ridiculous, but it's a real consequence of how time and space are linked in Einstein's theory. It doesn't break physics, and it doesn't let you communicate with aliens or change the outcome, but it proves that simultaneity, what we consider to be happening right now, isn't absolute. It depends on your motion, your frame of reference, and your position in space. What makes the Andromeda Paradox so unsettling is that it introduces quantum scale weirdness into everyday life. We usually think of time travel or time distortion as something that happens only near black holes or in theoretical labs. But here, Penrose is saying you don't need anything exotic, just a stroll down the street can shift your perception of time on a galactic scale. Alright, and that was Layer 5. Let's get into Layer 6, guys. Flight 513. The legend of Flight 513 claims that a commercial aircraft vanished in 1954 over the Atlantic and mysteriously reappeared in 1989, landing with a crew and passengers who were all skeletons. It was supposedly a Lockheed Super Constellation belonging to the Santiago Airlines, and when it landed in Brazil, authorities were shocked to find the pilot still in the cockpit, dead and skeletal, yet somehow still gripping the controls. animals. The story circulated in tabloid articles and paranormal forums, often used as evidence of time travel, but none of it ever happened. There's no official record of a Santiago Flight 513, and aviation historians confirm that Santiago Airlines never operated a transatlantic route. The original report can be traced back to a satirical article in Weekly World News, a publication known for fake stories. Even the details about the plane type and route don't match with any known operations from that era. Chronostasis. Chronostasis is a real and well-documented psychological illusion that affects your perception of time. It usually happens when your eyes move quickly from one point to another. I know you just tried that. I know you just tried it in real life. This is called a saccade. Right after this movement, your brain fills in the gap in vision by extending the perception of the new scene, which can make time seem to freeze for a moment. That's why, when glancing at a ticking clock, the second hand seems to pause unnaturally before it starts ticking normally again. What's happening is that your brain doesn't want to process the sudden blur from your rapid eye movement, so instead it creates a seamless visual experience by stretching out the first image you land on. But that fake stretch gives you the false sense that time briefly slowed or stopped. It's an actual feature of the way human vision works. It's not a bug or any kind of glitch. This effect has actually also been measured in controlled experiments and also shows up in other senses, like hearing and touch. It's not dangerous and doesn't imply anything paranormal, but it is one of the best examples of how your brain can completely rewrite your experience of time without you realizing it. YOGTZE case. Yogzi? The Yogzi case is one of Germany's strangest and unresolved mysteries. In 1984, a man named Gunther Stoll, who had been suffering from paranoia and anxiety, suddenly wrote the letters YOGTZE on a scrap of paper while sitting with his wife. A few hours later, he was found dying in a wrecked car off a highway. He was naked and injured, but strangely, he'd told the truckers who found him that 4 men had been with him, none of whom were ever identified. What makes the case even stranger is the cryptic note and the fact that his injuries didn't seem to match a normal crash. Some people speculated that he'd been assaulted elsewhere and the car was staged. The YOGTZE message became central to the mystery. It wasn't clear whether it referred to a license plate, a code, or something random his mind just created. For decades, theories ranged from Cold War spies to drug conspiracies to mental illness. But in April 2025, German investigators closed the case after DNA analysis confirmed no one else was in the car. The crash was declared a solo accident, and the strange circumstances were attributed to a combination of psychological delusion and just coincidence. Die Glock, German for the bell. Die Glock is one of the most enduring Nazi conspiracy theories. It supposedly refers to a secret weapon the Nazis were developing during the final years of World War II, described as a bell-shaped device made of metal and filled with a glowing unknown substance called Serum 525. According to the story, it was capable of warping gravity, altering time, or even opening portals. Some versions say the scientists involved died under mysterious circumstances, and that the entire device was moved to South America after the war. The legend gained traction after 2000 when Polish journalist Igor Wachowski claimed to have seen classified documents describing the project. But no physical evidence has ever been found. No German scientists left credible records of such a device, and historians say the claims are unsupported. The supposed documents were never authenticated, and the timelines conflict with real historical events. It's also often tied to other fringe theories about Nazi UFOs or secret Antarctic bases. Drinking primordial soup. The term primordial soup refers to the early Earth environment where life is believed to have first emerged. In 1953, Stanley Miller and Harold Urey tested this theory by creating a sealed flask filled with gases thought to represent the early atmosphere: methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water vapor. They applied electric sparks to simulate lightning, and within a few days, amino acids, the building blocks of life, had formed. This experiment was a major breakthrough in understanding abiogenesis, the idea that life could arise from non-living chemistry. But now let me explain how this all relates to time travel. There's a speculative idea that if time travel were possible, someone from the future could go back far enough, billions of years, to Earth's prebiotic era and introduced the chemical seed that sparked life. In that scenario, life didn't begin by chance. It began because someone made it happen. The time traveler becomes the ultimate origin point, not just for humanity, but for every single living being. This creates a cosmic bootstrap paradox. Life arises because someone from the distant future went back and made it arise. The implications are massive. It would mean the course of biology, evolution, and history could have all been set in motion by one decision. A drop of amino acids, a small alteration to Earth's conditions, even a different lightning strike pattern. In this lens, the primordial soup wasn't a random chemical broth, it was engineered, and everything that's ever lived is the byproduct of that intervention. Tachyonic antitelephone. The tachyonic antitelephone is a thought experiment in physics used to illustrate the paradoxes that would happen if faster-than-light particles, tachyons, actually existed. The idea is that if you could send a signal faster than light, it might arrive before it was sent. That means, in theory, you could send a message into your own past. This breaks causality and creates paradoxes like receiving a warning before a disaster and preventing it, so the message never had to be sent. Tachyons themselves are purely hypothetical. They've never been detected or produced, and most physicists think they're impossible because they would violate relativity. The antitelephone is not a real machine, but a way to show why FTL communication causes problems. Even if tachyons existed, trying to control or use them would likely cause contradictions that make reality unstable. It's often brought up in discussions about whether time travel would ever be physically possible as well. The Vanishing Hotel. The Vanishing Hotel story has been told in many forms, but the most famous version comes from an old tale set during the 1889 Paris Exposition. In it, a mother and daughter check into a hotel. The mother falls ill and the daughter is sent to fetch medicine. When she returns, both her mother and the hotel room are gone. Staff claim that no such people ever checked in. The daughter searches Paris for days, but the woman is never seen again. Years later, it's revealed the mother died of plague, and authorities erased all records to prevent panic. This story first appeared in late 19th century newspapers and was reprinted in mystery anthologies, but no real-world evidence backs it up. There's no missing persons report or family documents, and there's no official record of such an event. And that was the Time Anomalies Iceberg, guys. I hope you enjoyed this amazing video. I had so much fun with this one. These science videos are my favorite to make. I really fucking enjoyed this, guys. I hope you enjoyed watching it. Be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment of what you want me to cover next, and everybody have a great night. Sweet dreams.